Hey, good morning, Sagar. Good evening, Prathik. How are you?
I'm
Doing
doing
good.
pretty well. Good morning.
Good. Hey, thanks again for making the time. So, the intent of this session is we've been doing these community workshops as a part of my series called AI Musings. And based on requests from a lot of different people, what we wanted to do was to have certain talk tracks where I essentially invite experts, if you will. And really, the goal of that is people that have actually built systems using some of these concepts. And therefore, they're able to then share real practical knowledge of when they did something, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, perhaps give some glimpse into the inner workings of why they came around making certain decisions. So that's the talk track that I wanted to establish. And one of the first things that we want to talk about was to really take a look at the spectrum of taking a look at the data pipeline all the way from data ingestion to going outbound. And I couldn't really think of people better than the two of you, given that I've worked with you over the last several months, in your case, Sagar, and Pratik, more than a couple of years now with you. We'll get into the details, but I want to give a sense of what the overview of the session was going to be. We'll probably talk about 45 minutes, 50 minutes about this. But before we get started with the session itself, Sagar, if you wanted to give a quick intro about your background, the work that you've been doing and fun you've been having, that'll be great.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the opportunity, Shri. My background is in engineering. I've moved from core engineering to more machine learning engineering. So right now I'm an ML engineer at Boston Consulting Group based out of Boston. And I do come from a startup background. I do also consult a few startups. So it's a fun time to be in the startup area. So I also try to contribute there as well.
I've had intense discussion sessions with Sagar in the past, and I thought he'd be a great person for us to share some of his insight. And thanks again for being here. Pratik, why don't you give us a little
Thank
bit
you, Shri.
about the background and what work you've been doing in the larger
Yeah.
AI/ML space?
So I'm Prathik. I've been working in machine learning from probably about five. I have experience working with NLP, GenAI recently, and I have also spent a lot of time on time series. I have also worked from development to DevOps to all the way robotics to AI. So right now, focus more on GenAI and models.
Sounds good. Pratik and I have had an opportunity to collaborate on a product called Chat Pilot, where there is a lot of the core ingredients of how you talk to a certain system, preempt and take certain actions. So a lot of what we are going to talk about, I think we'll cover some of that. And Carlos, we're glad that you are able to join us. And I know I called you impromptu an hour ago, but I know you're more than anything super inquisitive and you're a super curious person. And I thought you represent a lot of the people in our class, in our workshops, where you're all eager to learn, eager to do. Carlos, maybe just give a quick summary of your background and your interest and foray into the AI space.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I am what they call a CFO turned AI nerd, and I'm trying to define me in this sphere. I have more than 25 years experience as a CFO and finance leader in different companies, industries, languages, countries, whatnot. And I started an upskilling process in machine learning and artificial intelligence maybe 7 years ago now. And recently, that upskilling process continued on AI and Gen AI specifically. When people meet me and hear me talk, they say, "Why don't you transition your career into data science?" I said, "No, because I have to fight with people like Patik and Sagar, which are young blood, full of energy, and I don't have the energy anymore. But I do have a lot of business experience, and I think that's a good complement to this, right? Having been exposed to business, to strategy, to people, everything that we build tech is going to be rejected systematically by people. It's not going to be adopted by people. You need to force them to use it. So those are the things that I can bring here to the sphere. I love to build. You've seen me. I love to build stuff and whatnot, but I see that my strength is in having the business savviness and corporate experience and the ability to understand these topics enough to be dangerous and to interact with people like you.
Yeah, dangerous is the keyword. Yeah, we'll leave it at that, Carlos. Okay, sounds good. So, what we wanted to do for this particular session was think of it as a high level overview of the complete data AI ML plane, if you will. We will talk all the way from we are picking up data, what are some of the things we have observed when we look at data, structured, unstructured data, how do we go through it? Then we will move on to embedding and chunking as the next logical block. And then from there on, we will move on to retrieval. We will talk about retrieval strategies, what works, what doesn't work, perhaps talk about context memory in that space. And then we will also talk about evals, observability, some of the lessons learned there. And then we will spend a little bit of time on model training, model orchestration, and then finally talk about how do we take all of this and integrate into other SaaS products or other SaaS apps, right? So broadly speaking, those are the areas that we want to talk about. And again, we will deep dive. Make sense? Okay,
Yep.
sounds good.
Sure.
And the audience for this particular track is going to be slightly technical. We are assuming people listening to this talk at least have some background as a solution architect, a technical product manager, and we're not trying to dilute all the topics, or you could be a developer, obviously, and trying to learn some of these things. Okay, with that said, maybe let's start with the data loading part, really looking at structured, unstructured data, and how do we take a look at this? Sagar, maybe if you want to share some of your insights in terms of how you've taken a look at it, how you've approached taking any data and loading it into a target system, what would be some of the thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think the data loading has changed drastically since AI was introduced. Earlier, the focus in the AI ML space was more on structured data. You couldn't process unstructured data, right? But you could actually have a lot of these machine learning models that you don't have to have labeled data for the models to be trained. So that's it, right? There are definitely challenges with ingesting unstructured data because the sheer volume of it. One of the problems we faced within BCG was how do you ingest big documents, right? Documents that are more than, let's say, 50 megabytes in size. So you cannot use up all of your memory, and then your code is going to be stuck. You're going to be running out of memory and to process it. So one of the challenges was, of course, ingesting big documents. Another challenge we faced was the sheer types of documents. You have PDF document, you have text document, you have Excel document, and because we are in a Microsoft ecosystem, users also wanted to upload OneNotes, things like those. And then there's the transcripts and all of that. You have to have a preprocessor for each of those file types, which is not trivial. Then we would only support certain file types and then move on to create another project to support another file type. Those were the major challenges, I would say. Another challenge is more application specific because we had knowledge graph, and every time we were ingesting documents, it was a big lift in terms of updating the knowledge graph. That could be probably resolved by some other techniques, but I think I'd say at a high level, those were the three major challenges we faced.
Got it. Maybe a quick follow-up question. Moving data is not something new. I understand that GenAI has introduced new flavors and new things to think about, but has some of the tooling changed? AWS has a Glue, there is Apache NiFi, there are products that specialized in ETL. Has any of that changed because of the advent of GenAI over the last couple of years? How have the ETL tools themselves changed?
Pratik, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think I used Apache a long time ago. I don't think something has changed. So I used unstructured. This is a very good tool that I have been using in the challenges are like labeling or putting the semantic documents together or the understanding the document itself. So earlier we were building the document pre-processor, which was for every document you have to understand the structures. For example, if there is a paragraph as a title, so that has to come under the umbrella of the one document, and because of the length based context length based embedding, we're not able to get the proper answer or complete answer because of the fact that you're not able to put the documents correctly. So I think that has definitely solved in my case, we have been using unstructured to process it, which it doesn't care. It has a vision based model inside using CNN to create layouts and convert them into the elements. And so even your flowcharts and tables, all they have real meaning. So when user asks the question, it was extremely hard in the recursive text splitter or even in the text processors. So I think unstructured or any library which is converting the unstructured data into a little bit of a structure, that definitely adds a lot of value in the outcome.
Got it. And maybe one other follow-up question, Pratik, here. I know you built something called Chat Pilot ETL. Can you
Yeah.
maybe talk about the high-level features that was in the ETL tool and what caused you to build that product or feature?
Okay, so we initially we started with the text processors, but it did not solve the problem because in the real world you have a lot more complex documents which contains the images, workflows, and tables, and so they all have the meanings because we were using the vanilla chunking system that was not efficient. That does not turn out into the business outcome that's hard. The vision-based model or any other ways you can structure and store the information, not the text, that definitely brings more value than if you look at the research papers, they have more meanings than text.
Carlos, that correlates to some of the conversations we have had where if you look at engineering manuals, for example, not everything is going to be in text. There will be figures, there will be tables, there will be references, photos. And what you want to get sense out of is some of the meaning and the intent of what that is and making sense out of it. Any thoughts or any questions that you have in that space?
When you build out of the plain vanilla tools, you're going to get basic results. And one of the things I'm missing, one of the chatbots I built is integrating the knowledge inside in images, technical drawings, workflows, tables, lots of tables. Some of those tables are more graphic than
Yeah.
data filled. Definitely, you need to move into more. The other thing I was thinking while I was listening to you guys, chatbots I've worked with are based on operation and maintenance manuals for big equipment, big machinery. And there's certain topics that are common across all the manuals, like the security and the safety of the operation. Semantically, those text chunks are going to score high against security and safety. And if I ask a specific question about security and safety, then the response is going to be, the answer is going to be, the semantic search is going to be confusing because it's going to be pulling text from different areas in the manual where I am interested only in one part of the manual. I think that's where graphs, knowledge graphs, help you better locate and address those questions and get better results.
Yeah, got it. So maybe if I could summarize this particular segment is that the type of data has significantly changed from where it used to be structured data or semi-structured data sitting in a SQL, NoSQL database. Now a lot more data set is getting introduced. Sagar talked about OneNote. I know Pratik and I have done integration with Google Drive and the type of documents that you put, sometimes it is Excel, it is PDFs. These PDFs sometimes have drawings, sometimes they have drawings that are represented by human drawing, and sometimes there's a machine produced drawing. So from my perspective, the ETL tools have had to adjust and bring in certain APIs and libraries that would make sense out of it and load it. And I think to Carlos's point, the data needs to be fully understood. So sometimes you cannot take semantic meaning because you want to take literal meaning. So you have to rely back physical data as opposed to semantic data. But yeah, for rest of what we are going to talk about today, if the data itself is not clear, your AI models are not going to be providing relevant results. Sounds good. So let's move on to perhaps embedding and chunking. Maybe Sagar, make it easy for people to understand what is chunking. And I know we have talked about physical chunking, semantic chunking. Maybe give a little bit of explanation of what that is. And then maybe we could then talk about embedding.
Yeah, a naive way to ask a question of ChatGPT. You have 100 documents in your database. You pull everything in all of those 100 documents and dump it into ChatGPT's chat window or context window and hope that the question that you're asking, the ChatGPT is able to somehow parse that bulk load of information and get the right context.
If
To be able,
your subscription allows you to do that.
yeah, so there's also the limit on the context window and all of that.
Exactly.
That's a naive way of doing things, and you would be surprised to know if you don't have too many documents, maybe that is the way to go. You don't have to do the heavy lifting every time. But a better way that has since been introduced over the past 2 years is retrieval augmented generation. What it is under the hood is very simple. You don't have this, you don't feed the entire document or hundreds of documents into the LLM's context window, but you have a preprocessor that somehow is able to figure out with high probability that this is the part of the text, part of the document that would have the answer to your user, to the question asked by the user. And that is it. That is chunking. How do you separate the text into different chunks so that you could probably run some sort of a semantic retriever to go over the documents and find out that, okay, this is the question and these are the chunks that are able to answer that question. So that at its most basic, it is that chunking is chunking the entire corpus of text into smaller chunks of text. That's what it is. Now the most naive way of chunking a text is to break it into 100 words each. So each chunk would have 100 words in it. And because you have to have some level of continuity between chunks, you would have some sort of an overlap. So you have 100 words in one chunk, and then you take the next chunk, but you have some overlap between those two chunks. One sentence is shared between these two chunks. Better ways, I think Pratik, you were pointing to it earlier, is unstructured has a lot of ways of chunking. One of the things that we have been using at BCG is chunking by title. They use some vision models,
Yeah.
or maybe they have some preprocessors, preparsers that finds out that from the title of the text that this is
Grouping.
so there's grouping, so chunking by the semantic sense, so
Yeah.
you have one coherent concept inside one chunk. There are other ways too. Anthropic has been experimenting with adding some annotation for each chunk, which does require a little bit of preprocessing and a little bit of LLM. But yeah, that's another hood. That's what it is.
Got
Chunking
it.
is.
Maybe on the tool side, I know both of you have talked to me about unstructured. Are there other options available out there from a third party like unstructured? What other tools are out there?
Yeah, yeah, I can take that. It's every LLM orchestration framework has their own chunking library. So
Okay,
you have Haystack, you have LangChain, you have Llama Index, all of them will provide one.
Great.
Unstructured is special because that's their only thing that do. So they have a SaaS platform and then they have their open source libraries.
got it. So since they specialize in that, so they probably do a much better job. Now, do the
Yes.
model providers themselves, before going into the embedding step, if you will, does OpenAI or some of the model providers, they don't provide chunking abilities, they expect you to chunk outside?
Some vector databases, they have partnerships and stuff. Then you can pass your text, so it will automatically you still have to pay for it. So on the server side, you can do the embed.
Yeah,
That
but
is possible. But yeah,
I haven't seen model providers,
yeah.
OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini, providing chunking functions and libraries. I haven't seen it. I use Pinecone a lot, and they have server-side embedding models, but you need to pass on already the chunks of text. You need to do the chunking yourself.
Got it.
Yeah,
So
chunking you have to do it.
So then we are talking about chunking. There is physical and semantic chunking, and the way to do chunking is through somebody like unstructured or use LangChain or Llama Index or some other SDK or API provider. Maybe Pratik, if you want to explain embedding in simple terms, what is embedding? Let's say we have chunks now of the data. We have a corpus of data. We have broken it down either to physical chunks or semantic chunks. What exactly happens during the embedding step?
Let's think about embedding is a interpretation of the sentence, right? In the backend, it uses the sentence transformer and all those. The embedding represent the meaning of the sentence or the paragraph that you sent. That is the overall meaning of the embedding. It has a lot more importance in the business outcome because the embedding model that you choose has a lot more impact on the outcomes. For example, the problem that we were working on, the machinery instructions, and there we chose with the Gemini Gima model. The reason being is that it is specialized in the technical. It has been trained on it, and we created test cases and ran recall on all these precision metrics. We found that it was about 65 when we were using the all mini base model. Then we went to Gemini Gima model, which was roughly giving us 0.8 as a precision, which was not bad recall and precision. There are other metrics as MRR, all those things. MAR is also there, mean average. I think you can use all of them and figure out which is the right one for you. But if you're focusing more on open source and which is best for where you need more logical coding and you need, I think I have been using this BG large model, which is almost as capable of OpenAI embedding models. So I also tried with the smaller embedding models,
Got it.
smaller
So
dimension.
let me double click on that. So this was the example that Carlos gave, and I know that you switched the model out compared to the previous demo that we did for the city ordinance plan.
Yeah.
Help me walk through with a practical example. We had one data set that we downloaded from various cities and counties, which was more text data. I do not remember seeing any imagery there. But the other example that we received from Carlos, for example, had different text in different languages.
Yeah.
What exactly was the process where you said, okay, for this, I'm going to use embedding model A versus for something else, I did embedding model B? And if somebody else were to think about this, where would they go? Are they looking at Hugging Face? How do they, if I were to look at it, how am I going to go through this to say, okay, I want to, for this particular use case, I want to use this model. How do I arrive at that conclusion?
If you think from the engineering perspective on the decision making, the last way is you create some test data and run through the evaluation. If you come to the primary fundamentals, what is your documents look like? Are they complex? Do they have relevance? A lot more complex coding. All these things required the higher dimension embedding models. The reason being there has a lot more coherence than the, for example, we were working on the workday. Workday is simple, right? This is what my simple query is. Hey, what is my leave plans? What is the company policy and the finances? So those are simple queries where you can have the base embedding models, what you can say, low dimensional embedding models and use it. But for complex tasks where your relevance matters a lot, then you have to go for a higher embedding models.
Okay,
Even if it is a industry specific, you can fine tune and do
got it.
it. Yeah.
Maybe Carlos, I'll ask you. I know you did some work on Pinecone and picking up the Pinecone's embedding model, and you talked to me about sparse versus dense. Can you maybe
Yep.
shed some light on it?
Sure, absolutely. I would like to make a couple of remarks. This topic of chunking and embedding, the first one, which is I find fascinating, but also the biggest risk of all these tools, is that there is a huge hypothesis that when you chunk a big text into little pieces of text, each little piece will have a unique topic discussed. That's a big hypothesis because we haven't gone beyond that. Regardless that we do naive chunking or semantic chunking or specialized chunking, we are still assuming that a little piece of text will have will talk primarily about one topic. And if it talks about two topics or three topics, then it starts becoming the performance of the final answer of the chatbot or the tool is not going to be the same. Now, on embedding, I find embedding fascinating, and I have a conceptual um, inquiry with what Pratik said. Embedding is nothing more than vectorizing, that converting into data pieces of language. And it is not like A is one, B is two, and C is three. It's more you have these vectors which are defined by the model that build them that have dimensions. They can have 300 dimensions, they can have 1,000 dimensions, or they can have 4,000 dimensions. Each dimension is a semantic concept or a semantic topic. So what the model does is it takes the text and it says, okay, this text ranks high against these semantic dimensions, but it ranks low against these semantic dimensions. And that is where I have the question. We're still using generic embedding models. And we're assuming that the bigger the vector, the better the performance, only because I have more dimensions. But I can use that vector to process a technical document, the Bible, or a spiritual document, or a recipe book, right? And that means if that vector can accommodate these three sources, it means that it has dimensions, universal dimensions for all of them. What I would love to see is, okay, if I know that I am working with technical documents, operational and maintenance documents for big machinery, I would like to go and strip everything that is spiritual, everything that deals with health, everything that deals with day-to-day life, and keep only the technical dimensions of that vector, and even break them down further so that my document is ranked better against all these semantic dimensions that I need to have. And I am expecting that is the next evolution of embedding models. It's going to be the ability to select which dimensions you keep, which dimensions you disregard. And if you can break down the dimensions that you keep, how do you break them down? I anticipate that in the near future, we're going to be able to fine tune those embedding models even further to get better
Yeah.
performance in the.
That's a great point, by the way, Carlos. what we have, the embedders is generic, right? They are trained on a corpus of text, millions and millions of documents, but still
Sure.
generic, all-purpose thing. Now, the problem with that is at my earlier company, Clink had a conversational AI platform. It allowed AI developers to build chatbots or virtual agents. And there was this client that we were POCing with. It was a healthcare client, and they had documents that had a lot of these acronyms that are very things that only they have, right? That's not out in the world. And the embedder was doing poorly because it was showing on the retrievers not being able to pull the relevant documents. And what we did was, now remember the challenge, right? So you're at any point, you are never going to have labeled documents. It's always unstructured data.
Yeah.
And how do you fine tune your embedding model on the unstructured data? There are techniques out there. One of the things that Pratik, you mentioned, sentence transformers, popular right now. What they do is they use this concept of contrastive learning.
Yeah.
What they do is you have this unstructured text, and they assume that sentences within a paragraph, they are closer together in the embedding space, meaning that they are closely related.
Yeah.
And any sentence outside of that paragraph, that's not related to the two sentences in the same paragraph. So you have anchor positive and negative
Yeah.
examples. That's basically contrastive learning. You basically create or fine tune your model based on this anchor positive negative triplets, and you train your optimizer that. And that's something we did. It did run for quite a while. It is very compute intensive, but we were able to see that the retrieval results were really up compared to a generic. And yes, we could have, to your point, Carlos, we at that point, it is entirely possible we could have switched to a more smaller, nimbler model, and it would still retain all of those learnings of that particular text. It's a very interesting exercise.
Right.
Let me ask a question there, Sagar. But that exercise that you did was building the knowledge graph behind, or was
No,
still
this
not
is
related to
just
knowledge graph? Okay.
no,
Just
this is a custom embedding model for
Okay.
that for their text.
Excellent exercise. Excellent.
Let me ask a model evaluation or embedding evaluation question. If I
Mhm.
were to go to a website and then let's say Hugging Face is the most famous one that I know of, if I have my scenarios and if I say for this, what should I use? And then my parameters may be cost, my parameters may be quality of the retrieval results, it could be speed. These are the three dimensions that I typically tend to think about. Can I get recommendations of what to use for the scenario? What would be a place that I could go and get this information? Do you guys know of any place like that? Maybe that's a trick question.
I didn't get your questions.
In this example, like Pratik had to spend some time to figure out for this data set what to get. Okay. And then if I
You
want
mean
to
which
just
model to
go,
use?
if I want to go search on a website and say, what should I use? This is my example. Give me which embedding model should I use? Is there a place where I can go search for it?
Yes, you can. Hugging Face has
How,
a very large
how was that?
library of models. You can browse through them, but I think it also comes down to your use case. For
Yeah.
example, do you have on-prem compute?
Right.
Or
I'm
are
saying,
you
is there a
using
place where I can enter all of my criteria, provide sample inputs, and it will say, these are the 5 recommendations for you to use instead of me going through and browsing the entire Hugging Face?
I think what he's saying is rather than you spending the time figuring out what
maybe you
model,
I
could
want
build
to
a
have an
product for
expert.
it.
yeah,
What if, can I build an expert out of you and then say, that's the agent that I want to build? Why am I spending my time figuring out what to do?
I don't know. I'm sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not aware of one such a tool.
Maybe
Maybe we
that's a
can build
product
it.
idea. That's
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
okay. Okay, got it. Sounds good. Maybe let me move on to a adjacent topic. We touched upon vector databases, vectorizing it. We have now chunked data. We have selected an embedding model. I know there are several vector databases out there. There are specialist databases, Pinecone, Chroma, Quadrant, and then there are also databases that have been there around. Crest has PG Vector, Mongo has the ability to do vectors, Cassandra has vectors. If people were to generally think about, okay, I do need to store vector data in a vector database, these embeddings in a vector database. What are your thoughts, Sagar? How do you go about deciding which one to use?
I would say again, depends on the use case. I've seen it play out in two different ways, two different companies. At Clink, which was my earlier company, their only offering was the virtual agent. And we need to, at that pace, we needed to have, you said, a vector first database, very fast with support for gRPC and all of those protocols. And we chose to go with Quadrant. It's built for vectors, built for embedders, but there is a very high, I would say, learning curve to be able to use Quadrant.
Yeah.
And you have to also make it's also on-prem. They have a SaaS offering, I think, but it is developer friendly, but you have to spend a little bit of time learning it. But it's good for processing large volumes of documents, vectorizing. It has a very fast lookup. It's built ground up for vectors. Whereas at BCG, where we are not going to have more than probably 1,000 users, or maybe 2,000 users at most. And we chose to go with PG Vector because people know how Postgres works. It's already been using it for years now. And they have this added new extension, PG Vector. And it's too hard to not pass on and move to some other database altogether. No learning curve at all. It integrates seamlessly. But yes, what's the downside? You don't have gRPC support. That means that the lookup is going to be that much slower. So it's not going to scale as much.
From your perspective, yeah, definitely. I can see performance, reliability is more important than you can go. There is additional cost working with a different vendor that comes along with it and dealing with one more software provider. Like, what about you? I know you worked with Chroma. I know you worked with Chroma, and now in some of the products we are using PG Vector. What has been the difference between Chroma and PG Vector in your opinion?
As companies have been there, let's say there is a company which has been using SQL databases, which is a structured decision that you could make is like use the PG vector because you have the rows. So it's directly creating the embeddings. Then if you're worried more about the relevance and if you're more worried more about the scale or the throughput, it is definitely worth considering. Astra or even Pinecone is good at throughput and latency. They are number one, I guess. I have worked with the Chroma also. I don't think they have a SaaS platform or something. It's all open source. You can, as long as you can manage. Yeah.
All right. Okay, all right, fair enough. We get the idea. For the most general use cases, PG Vector will handle it unless you pick or specialized use cases for which you have to go make a case for why do you need a vector database.
And you can also run SQL filters also rather than running the metadata filters. It makes life easy.
Yeah,
Uh,
another thing I want to call out is a lot of these hyperscalers, Azure, AWS, they also provide their own vector databases, offloaded all of the decision making to the hyperscaler. I use Azure AI Search. It is even easier than PG Vector. Now, I don't know how it's going to scale, but for the purposes of the number of users we have, it's working fine. The retrieval quality could be a little better, but it's working fine. There's another third rail where users may tend to try to leverage using the hyperscalers, managed services.
Got it. So let me go off a slight tangent here. Since you spoke about hyperscalers and their platforms, Azure has a AI platform, Amazon has Bedrock, or I also use Grok, GROQ for inference. What has been your experience, Sagar, to when to use native providers and then when to go through the hyperscalers platform to let them do the heavy lifting? What has been your experience so far?
When you say native, do you mean
Like
OpenAI's chat
native, where
endpoint?
you go directly call OpenAI or you run it
Yeah,
through Llama.
got it. We did this exact exercise at BCG. We were evaluating OpenAI's chat endpoint, and for some context, BCG is one of the biggest consumers of OpenAI. One of the things we wanted to see is can we reduce some dependency on OpenAI and use the hyperscalers endpoint. We're still tapping into the OpenAI model, but using their inference provider. And we did a lot of comparisons. There isn't much difference. OpenAI's chat endpoint is already optimized for bulk inference. Probably they're using VLLMs on the back. They are using they are using all of the latest and the greatest. Azure, I think it's called Azure Foundry, that endpoint that they provided didn't offer any benefits in terms of performance. I would say it's your own pick, whatever suits you. At Quanta, we use Azure Foundry, but at BCG, we're using the native chat endpoints provided by OpenAI.
Got it. Pratik, what about from a Grok standpoint? How is it? I know we are using different models provisioned through Grok. Is it making things much faster for us?
I think from latency standpoint, Grok still wins the game. There are studies which shows the same model performing and accuracies at least plus or minus 10% in the different inference providers. I think you can go through that result. For example, in the GPT-5, it's all comes to the point of what's your configurations that you run on, because some providers, what they say is, I make billion requests a day. It definitely saves a lot of money. They go with a distilled model, and that definitely sometimes reduces your accuracy. And I think Rock is somewhere in middle for sure. It's not number one from the accuracy standpoint, but definitely from the latency standpoint, it is definitely doing insane. Yeah.
So do these inference providers, do they only primarily support open source model or closed source models?
They support the closed source also. All these OpenAI models are closed source. They're not open source.
Okay. Carlos, you have any questions or anything here?
No, none of that. So I tried to run an example on Grok. I thought it was fascinating, but I have not found a use for it at this point.
Yeah,
I
got
always
it.
stick
Okay.
to the base model.
All right, sounds good. So let's move on to the next area around agent orchestration. I know, Sagar, you have done some work on LangGraph. Pratik, I know you've looked into Crew AI. So I think there is AutoGen out there. So walk us through, share us your insights and what you've done with agent orchestration and what are some of the tools that you're coupling and how are you trying to derive best and optimal results? You can go, Sagar.
One of the major decisions you have to take is, do you build a custom agentic framework or do you use one off the shelf? I've in a place where BCG adopted this custom framework and we are hurting because of it. It cannot scale. I'm of the opinion right now is that you shouldn't probably use your custom framework or build a custom framework. People much smarter than you and me have built this agentic framework that you can plug and play into your system. Now, at a high level, there are two different types of agentic frameworks, two flavors of frameworks I would say available in the market. One is declarative, where there's a little bit of a learning curve. It's basically SQL is a declarative language, right? It's not using primitives. So you have to learn about their concepts, what a graph is, and how do you create nodes, and how do you connect the nodes. So that's their own language. That's why it's called declarative. As long as you know the language, you don't care how it works under the hood. It's SQL. Now the other flavor, and the example of this declarative type of agentic framework is LangGraph. They are our haystack. They are the declarative kinds of framework. The other flavor that OpenAI introduced a few months ago is it's called OpenAI's development kit or something, agent development kit.
Yeah.
They don't, is that what it's called? I don't know.
OpenAI SDK. Yeah.
OpenAI
Yeah.
SDK. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is if Python, which most of us know anyway, then there is no learning curve, right? It uses Python primitives and all of that. But there may be a little bit of coding involved because now you have to declare the classes and the functions and everything. So you do the do the right analysis and go with it. But either way, stick to a framework or choose a framework that you can scale. And what I mean when I say scale, it should support things looping or conditional edges,
Okay.
or you can build out a large swarm of agents. What if you have this big agent, this orchestrator, and then you have sub agents doing their own work? All of these things you should probably check that if they're supported by your LLM orchestration framework. Good news is that all of the agentic frameworks that are now popular support all of these things. So that's pretty much been my experience so far.
Okay, good. So to double click on that, even on the declarative part, can you talk a little bit about sequential versus non-deterministic workflows where event A can happen, some other event agent too. They're not necessarily sequential in a flow. How do these, regardless of primitive or declarative ways of coding these agents, how do they support both a very conditional and a sequential flow versus a completely non-deterministic flow?
Yeah, at its core, it doesn't have much to do with the framework itself. It's more to do with these traditional NLP methods. So what you would have probably is at each point, and this was supported by Kling even before the GenAI era. It is like an intent classifier. You're trying to find out what the user is trying to ask. And then based on that, the query takes a path, and at each point in the path there is a decision to be made, right? Do I take path 1, do I take path 2, do I take path 3? Now with the advent of Gen AI, things are much more advanced, whereas earlier you would probably have some fine-tuned model that you have to fine-tune it to only output certain intents. But now with Gen AI, all you have to do is prompt the model, the OpenAI model, and say that, hey, you don't have to fine tune it, is what I'm trying to say. You tell it that, hey, if the question is around, say, asking my savings balance, then take path A. And then if it's something else, then take path B. So that's the major difference between an agentic framework where you have agency, right? So you have deciding on which path to take versus a fixed workflow. It could be an ETL workflow where you don't have a lot of decisioning to make. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, then there is not a lot of agency there.
Got it.
So there's this agentic workflow is you have agency and you have agents deciding the route to take, whereas in a workflow, it's more static.
Yeah. I think this is a topic that we will maybe come back and double click, and that's probably where having some of your diagrams and what you did, we can revisit it. Pratik, more specifically, if you were to look at LangGraph versus Crew versus AutoGen, when is somebody supposed to look at certain things, and what is your research on these packages?
Yeah, so I have used both Creve and Landgraph. So if you look from the abstract standpoint, let's say you're trying to build an agent which does 100 things. So then it is you can definitely you have to most probably have to go with the Landgraph because you care more about output because the LLMs are still non-deterministic. So you cannot say the same query done from the two different devices or even from the same device will generate the same output. So the point is you cannot directly go for the crave every time. So if you're very clear with very small workflows where there are not much of the graph stuff happening, so then you can definitely go with a crew. But if you're caring more about business outcomes and a lot more deterministic way, because at the business, you're from a QA perspective or a business perspective, it's more about can you generate the same result always. So that is the goal. Then you have to spend a lot of time if you're building the land graph. You have to spend a lot of time understanding and making sure that workflow is always correct. Yeah, and
Basically,
some point in
okay,
time you may have to spend a lot of time on planning agents.
got it.
I'm sorry to intervene here, but I think the important thing, everybody is now talking about agents. And my LinkedIn is exploding with people expert in agents and whatnot. But it's everybody's running around with a hammer looking for a nail to hammer. And they're forgetting that what creates value in a business is the process properly defined. And that process is captured in a workflow. And not everything in a workflow has to be done with AI. If you do everything in a workflow with AI, those are the workflows that cost $1,000 per run and can run a company bankrupt after a couple of thousands of runs, right? That's the important thing is business value understanding. What is the work? What? How are you going to add value in each one of the steps? How can you eliminate inefficiencies with a properly defined workflow, and then you can jump into deciding, okay, this one I build it with Crew AI or LangGraph. I fully agree with Pratik. Crew AI seemed to me when I started using it for absolutely deterministic workflows. So if you have workflow that go through stage 1, 2, and 3 every single time without exceptions, Crew AI is perfect. because in the end, crew is nothing more than a prompting
Yeah.
framework.
Yeah,
What
that's
you're
what
doing is
my
We are
you're
basically spending a lot
structuring
more time on the
your
prompting. Yeah.
exactly. You're doing a prompting for the background, for the backstory, and a prompting for the goal, and prompting for the task, and it's a prompting framework. In the end,
Yeah.
you're building very structured prompts that are sent to an LLM, and then the LLM is act according to the persona that is describing that prompt with the action of that prompt. But things need to happen the same way always. LandGraph breaks the linearity of the workflow and allows you to capture conditional cases, if cases, and this and that. And you can even run some of the nodes in LangGraph can be Crew AI crews, right? The use case, what is fascinating is that you have all these marbles or these Lego pieces and you bring them together according to what you want to build. But you need to have clear in your mind what you want to build.
I love the point that Carlos you bring with not bring a sledgehammer every time. And how do you define AI? To the extent that you could mimic human intelligence, that's AI. It does not have to be deep learning models. It does not have to be Gen AI models. Even if you're writing a function or a program or a simple script to automate certain things, that's still AI.
Sure.
Got it. Sounds good. We'll move on to probably one other heavy topic and then we'll wind down. So again, I'll go with you, Sagar, first. Can you talk a little bit about model serving? Maybe start off with model fine-tuning, and then once you have fine-tuned a model, how do we go through model serving and the model orchestration side of things?
Yeah, one of the things, frankly, I don't have a lot of experience around model fine-tuning. What I did fine-tune was more of an embedding model, which is still transformer, but not as big as the models that we see out there. It's still a billion parameter model. Fine-tuning a model, you could have data parallelism and tensor parallelism and to use PyTorch and all of that to train your model, or you should probably use managed services, SageMaker and all of that to fine-tune your model. Having said that, I haven't had an experience doing a fine-tuning model yet. At Clink, everything had to be on-prem because the nature of the business. You cannot use the hyperscalers inference endpoints or chat GPT endpoints to serve up the models. There, we used VLLMs. I'm pretty sure all of these inference providers use that under the hood. I think there is also another by NVIDIA. I'm not sure what the name is. They came out with it last year. Hugging Face also has an inference provider, by the way. It's called something. I don't remember. VLLM by far is the most popular. A lot of these hyperscalers do use that. Advantage of using an inference provider is that they do a lot of these things under the hood to make the inference faster, even with the same big model. The way they would do it, for example, is they would batch certain requests, a lot of requests together. The underlying assumption is that the time it takes to run one query is equal to the time it takes to run 100 queries. You are running it in batches to optimize the inference time. And there's also a lot of these other things that these guys do, right? There is also semantic caching. VLLM is one clear winner there. If you're using hyperscalers inference endpoints, then you don't have to worry too much about
Yeah, I
the
think
inference.
correct. So I think first of all, I see a lot of people misuse model training, model fine-tuning. Let's face it, nobody's building models. If people are saying that they're building their own models, that's a bunch of BS. Yeah, Pratik, you want to
Plus,
add anything to it, or Carlos?
yeah, I wanted to add to model fine tuning in the case of LLMs. The more we specialize in RAG, in chunking, in semantic, in vectorization and whatnot, which is the behind the scenes retrieval part of it, the less load and burden we're giving to the LLM. I found, for example, that when I use an LLM to take all this context after the retrieval and produce a structured piece of text in natural language, GPT 3.5 is perfect for that, right? So I don't need to fine tune anything else because the only thing I'm using
Yeah.
the LLM for is to build language. I'm not using it to reason. I'm not using it to do all of these complex things. Now, if I wanted to incorporate the LLM into the retrieval process, then probably fine tuning is. But I agree with you. Fine tuning takes a lot of machine, a lot of power, a lot of data, and a lot of money, of course, to be able to achieve that.
Yeah.
One final note, there is a nice parallel to model fine tuning because LLMs in the end are machine learning models. It's inference
Yeah.
models, or predictive models. They're transformers, they're super complex, super difficult to understand, whatnot. The layer below those is computer vision models. are less complex, and you can still understand them, and you can still understand the convolution. You do a lot of fine tuning in computer vision. In computer vision, it's very common to get a basic set of weights and then adjust them to the specific data set that you have. If it is technical images, nature images, and whatnot, it's just an iterative process that consumes much less data, much less computer and whatnot. The principles are there, but achieving it with LLMs is very difficult.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so maybe we'll just move on to the last topic. I know I said it the last time, but final thing that I'm now remembering is evals and human in the loop. So maybe Pratik, if you want to talk about any experience that you've had on running evals and verifying the results that did come as a part of the rank system.
I have never built a full eval system for the generation models or the outcomes, but I definitely have built the eval for the retrieval model and stuff. I basically created about few hundred, label data and stuffs, and then validated for the which embedding model makes a lot of sense for me, retriever. I think as Carlos also mentioned, in case of the retrieval augmented generation, it's more about can you fine tune the retriever model rather than fine tuning the generation model, and more fixing on the retriever and ranking. I think from the eval perspective, I think you can build your own mechanisms or pipelines and stuff for the re-ranking, because re-ranking has a lot of advantages in the machine learning. The two concepts which matters in any model is candidate generation and the ranking. As long as you can have them great, the outcome will be great, even if you don't fine tune the generation model, or even you can go with a low racks. Yeah, in
Right.
our case we search for different industries and stuff. I think low racks and all those things makes a lot of sense.
I had an interesting conversation with someone yesterday where when all of these models come out, they usually give you benchmarks of what I did in the math exam on
Yeah,
chemistry or
actually.
whatever. But in real world, they're like not useful that much. To some degree, they are. What these guys are working on is to create eval frameworks and benchmarks that are focused on
Mm,
industries. It's a data labeling company. They're moving into evals and how to do evals and benchmarks and harness, let's say on the medical industry, financial
mm,
services, or travel and transportation, whatever it is, to make sense of actual business use cases. Because I'm not disagreeing there is no chemistry and biology research, but you don't have to be PhD doing that for everyday purpose. There are also people building eval and data
mm.
in certain areas, and their goal is to also monetize those testing frameworks. And they're looking to sell the testing frameworks. I thought that was interesting.
Scale AI, unstructured, at the end of the day, all these are labeling companies.
Right. There was a company I was speaking to was a competitor to Scale AI, where they were, going towards. Sagar, anything you want to add to it?
That at VCG, the product we are building, there has been a lot of focus on the evaluation framework. The problem we were facing was with each release, the quality of answers would degrade and would go down, and nobody would know why, what happened. Whereas we had this bunch of unit tests and regression tests, the traditional software engineering tests, enough to catch the regression in the quality of the answers. That's when we decided to introduce evaluation framework or evaluations of the quality of answers as part of our release process, our CI/CD process. That was a big exercise. That was so we have at BCG, we have this adoption team that socializes the concept of this product across the organization. And we had to work with that team to find out good pair of good quality or ground truth question answers for each of those tools. What started out as an objective to probably have 500 ground truth question answers, right, as your golden question answers. And then we would run the metrics off of those golden question answers. That was our initial goal, 500 or close to that number. And we ended up having 50 odd because getting high quality golden truth data is hard. The main challenge is how do you know the answer may be correct right now, but then it is not correct month after current events, things like those. And we have web scraping or web search tool. Now, how do you evaluate a web search tool? So there are so many challenges in obtaining the golden truth or the golden question answer
Yeah.
pair. Now that once we have gotten that, the rest of the process was relatively easy because I think you might have mentioned this. We have the traditional kind of metrics, bag of word metrics model, accuracy, precision, recall. You could
Yeah,
probably engram it to make
yeah,
it a little bit more sophisticated than simple bag of word. But there are also another set of metrics called LLM as judge metrics,
yeah. I
where
know.
right. Another word, it's you're prompting your model to rate the answer correctness or answer relevance and all of that. And you're prompting it, giving it good examples to scale or to rate the response between 1 and 5. So all told, we did introduce it as part of CI/CD, where each question would or each generated answer would have its own rating. And if the rating is below a certain threshold, we stop the release. We have someone take a look at the quality of answers generated. And that did stop a lot of, it did prevent regressions. Of course, there were still issues, but regressions with the quality of the current answers were avoided because of that.
Okay. All right.
Basically.
Sounds good, guys. I think this is the first time I'm doing a session like this. I've always had people come and talk to me about a particular topic. I've always done it one-on-one, but this was the first time that I'm doing a long form type of podcast with three others. This has been fun. I know we went a little longer, and it's been fun for me in that I've picked up quite a few things and I got clarity by sitting undisturbed for an hour, and I have nowhere else to go. I cannot be texting other people, and I'm literally following every single word that you're talking about. No better way to learn. I have a couple of other ideas that are coming into mind, but firstly, I'll get any closing reaction and thoughts before we talk about anything else.
Definitely, it has been great. We learned how other people are doing and what the problems and challenges they faced and how they have been able to resolve. I think the sessions like this, technical, which are very hard to find in any public platform, I think it has been good. Yeah.
Good. Sagar, what about you?
This is great. Loved your point of view, Pratik. I think some of the work that you have been doing, it's building things from scratch
Yeah.
and building foundational things, and which is a great experience always. As lovely to hear it from you and Carlos for your insights. It's there is always, I've always believed that the tools are always going to be there, right? But what about the people and the processes? That is what enables you to adopt AI. It's not the tools. Tools have always, they will be there. They've always been the tools. But the human element is very much important to allow adopting AI across the organization, which I think you brought out first, initially, Carlos. It was a lovely point. But yeah, it's been a very engaging discussion. If I could go back in time, I would probably say that I missed talking about some of the more things that these inference engines do because I've seen it closely. Maybe I don't know if you can edit it somehow, Sri, magically, but I was talking about flash attention. It's basically something that these guys do a lot to improve the latency of the model.
Think this
There's
was, I wanted to give a level set in terms of major blocks of work that we have to do. I definitely think some of these topics, or all of these topics, quite honestly, need a double click. Carlos, I know I kind of just called you and said, "Hey, Carlos, what do you
No worries.
think?"
Always fascinating to me listen to you guys and how you build stuff and when you're doing it already big scale and programmatically. I know we'll never get there, but I understand the language. And again, where I want to position myself is at a point where I can understand this, but it can move the business ahead. The customer that I have that I'm developing the chatbot for, I always tell them this is not a technical solution. Eventually, we will find Shri will help us implement the technical solution. This is a strategic project. Why? Because these tools change the way people do things. And whenever you change the way people do things in a company, you're changing the culture. And
yeah,
that's a strategic move. That's not technical. At the same time, people resist and people reject. They're comparing the chatbot that we build with ChatGPT and saying that it doesn't work because ChatGPT gives better answers. The things like that. Those are the kind of things that we have to deal on a daily basis in the adoption process, which makes all these more fascinating. And I am more exposed to this. It was great. Thank you for the invitation and hope to be here in other one of these sessions.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So I think the next time around, what I'm thinking is I want to spend a little bit time on tools because we all use different tools. We use different frameworks. We go about coding in different ways for different areas of whatever we try to do. So maybe next time I'm thinking about to mix it up to actually demonstrate, hey, this is my setup. This is generally how I'm running things. This worked for me. This did not work for me. So we'll try to balance out. But I'll tell you one thing, what I've realized by doing so many of these now it's much harder editing. It takes me double or three times the amount of time to edit a video
Yes.
I
compared
can
to what I make.
imagine. Yeah,
So,
for
but
sure.
anyway, so sounds good, guys. Thanks for making the time, and we'll talk
Yeah.
to you soon.